Chapter 4. Tip makes an experiment in magic. Makes an experiment. You can just say Tip experiments with magic. Am I right? Okay. The boy, small and rather delicate in appearance, seemed to be somewhat embarrassed at being called a father by the tall, awkward, pumpkin-headed man. But to deny the relationship would involve another long, tedious explanation. So he changed the subject by simply asking, "Are you tired?" "Of course not," replied the other. "But," he continued after a pause, "it is quite certain I shall wear out my wooden joints if I keep on walking." Tip reflected as they journeyed on that this was true. He began to regret that he had not constructed the wooden limbs more carefully and sustainably. Well, fix it, buddy. Yet how could he ever have guessed that the man he made merely to scare old Mumbai, whose real name is Mombi, would be brought to life by means of a magical powder containing an old pepper box? Answer me that. So he ceased to reproach himself and began to think how he might yet remedy the deficiencies of Jack's weak points. While thus engaged, they came to the edge of the wood, and a boy sat down to rest upon an old sawhorse that some woodcutter had left there. "Why don't you sit down?" he asked the Pumpkinhead. "Won't it strain my joints?" inquired the other. "Whew! Of course not. It'll rest them," declared the boy. So Jack tried to sit down, but as soon as he bent his joints farther than usual, they gave way altogether, and he came clattering into the ground with such a crash that Tip feared he was entirely ruined. He rushed to the man, lifted him up to his feet, straightened his arms and legs, and felt the head to see if by some chance it had been cracked. But Jack seemed to be in pretty good shape after all, and Tip said to him, "I guess you better remain standing hereafter. It seems the safest way." "Very well, dear father, just as you say," replied the smiling Jack, who had been in no wise confused by his tumble. Tip sat down again. Presently the Pumpkinhead asked, "What is that thing you are sitting on?" "Oh, it is a horse," replied the boy carelessly. "What is a horse?" demanded Jack. "A horse? Why, there are two kinds of horses," returned Tip, slightly puzzled on how to explain. "One kind of horse is alive, and it has 4 legs and a head and a tail, and people ride upon its back." "I understand," said Jack cheerfully. "That is the kind of horse you are sitting on now?" "No, it isn't," answered Tip promptly. "Why not? That one has 4 legs, a head, and a tail." Tip looked at the sawhorse more carefully, and found that the Pumpkinhead was right. He had to look at it. Goodness. The body had been formed from a tree trunk, and a branch had been left sticking up at one end, so that it looked very much like a tail. In the other end were 2 big knots that resembled eyes, and a place had been chopped away so that it might be mistaken for a horse's mouth. As for the legs, there were 4 straight limbs cut from the tree and stuck fast onto the body, being spread wide apart, so that the sawhorse would stand firmly when a log was laid across it to be sawed. "This thing resembles a real horse more than I imagined," said Tip, trying to explain. "But a real horse is alive, and trots and prances and eats oats." "Okay, well, I eat oats, too." "Well, this is nothing more than a dead horse, made of wood, and used to saw logs upon." "If it were alive, wouldn't it trot and prance and eat oats?" inquired the Pumpkinhead. "It would trot and prance, perhaps, but it wouldn't eat oats," replied the boy, laughing at the idea. "And of course it can't ever be alive, because it is made of wood." "So am I," said the Tin Woodman. Just kidding. "So am I," answered the man. Tip looked at him in surprise. "Why, so you are?" he exclaimed. "And the magic powder that brought you to life is in my pocket?" He brought out the pepper box and eyed it curiously. "Oh, I wonder," he said musingly, "if it would bring the sawhorse to life. If it would, I could ride on his back, and he would save my joints from wearing out." "Sure. But if you get that magic powder, I'd be interested in the bread coming to life. Just out of curiosity." "Oh, I'll try it," cried the boy, jumping up. "But I wonder if I can remember the words old Mum Bai said, and the way she held her hands up." He mispronounces her name, too. It's just because he's kind of rebellious. He thought about it for over a minute, and as he watched carefully from the hedge every motion of the witch and listened to her words, he believed he could repeat exactly what she had done. Yeah, wasn't she like, wee? So, he began sprinkling some of the magic powder of life from the pepper box upon the body of the sawhorse. Then he lifted his left hand with the little finger pointing upward and said, "Oui." "What does that mean, dear father?" asked Jack curiously. "Oh, I don't know," answered Tip, and then he lifted his right hand with his thumb pointing upward and said, "Tigre." "What's that, dear father?" inquired Jack. "Jack, be quick." "It means you must keep quiet," replied the boy, provoked at being interrupted at so important a moment. "How fast I am learning," remarked the Pumpkinhead, with his eternal smile. Tip now lifted both hands up above his head, with the fingers and thumbs spread out, and cried in a loud voice, "Pee-yerk!" Immediately the sawhorse moved, stretched its legs, yawned with its chopped mouth, and shook out a few grains of the powder off his back. The rest of the powders had seemed to vanish into the body of the horse. "Good!" called Jack, while the boy looked on in astonishment. "You are a very clever sorcerer, dear father."